Hello and welcome to Iridium Rock and Metal Reviews. Today we're going to do ranking the year and we're going to do 1996. So what I do on this is I name my favourite albums from that year. On this particular year I've got 5. I'm going to do some honourable mentions as well. But when I do these 5, I go from 5 to 1. 5 being my least favourite of my favourites, if you like. But obviously my top 5 are my favourite albums from that year. So as there's 5, it probably tells you already that it wasn't, I mean, there's quite a few honourable mentions as well, but it wasn't one of my favourite years for rock and metal. But it's still some good releases that year. So without further ado, we go number 5. Pantera, The Great Southern Trendkill. So obviously they carried on the heaviness of what they started over the last few albums. They gradually got heavier, and then when they hit Far Beyond Driven, you know, that was probably my favourite album of Pantera's. But this wasn't a bad album at all. It didn't have the same impact for me as the as Far Beyond Driven, but still a great album. Really menacing again, you know, real aggression in this album, and you know that's what the Pantera fans were obviously, you know, yearning for, and that's what they got with this. So yeah, really good. It's a strong album, but like I said, not my favourite Pantera album, but still good. A couple of my favourites on here: War Nerve, I thought that was really good, and Drag the Waters was a couple of my favourites from the album. But yeah, not the best from Pantera in my opinion, but still a strong album. And I'll give Pantera, The Great Southern Trendkill, 7 out of 10. Number 4, Iced Earth, Dark Saga. So yeah, I really like this album. I still think Iced Earth had better to come, in my opinion, but this was still a good album. They changed slightly with this one. A bit more melodic, a bit less thrashy than they was beforehand, but great, a real great album, really tight as usual. The rhythm section as tight as it can be. John Schaefer with some brilliant songwriting on this yet again. Matt Barlow, good vocalist. I mean, he is the like the mainstay. We ain't the mainstay of Iced Earth, but he's obviously appeared on the most albums. He seems to be the Iced Earth's fans' favourite vocalist for this band. But I actually think that some of the other vocalists that are sang for Iced Earth are really spot on as well. Nothing wrong with Matt Barlow though, really good. He's got that real deep voice. Weirdly enough, sometimes when he sings, it's like Paul Stanley for some reason, but you know, you can hear that slightly in his voice. But obviously he's got a lot more range than Paul Stanley, and he's got the aggressive side of it as well, so you know, something that Paul hasn't got. But you can definitely hear elements of it here. Some of my favourite ones on here: I Died for You, love that. The Hunter, A Question of Heaven, some really good tracks on this. An improvement, I feel, on the last album. But yeah, Iced Earth, The Dark Saga, I'll give that 8 out of 10. Right, next, Soundgarden, Down from the Upside. This is my number 3. So I like this album. I didn't think it was as good as Super Unknown, but you know, Super Unknown had a lot to live up to. It was a brilliant album. It was in fact my favourite album of, I think it was 94. Whenever that came out, it was my top album. I don't feel it was as dark as Super Unknown. Some of those Sabbathy feels, you don't get as many of those on this album. But you know, it's a really strong album still. Some of the singles are really good on it. Pretty Noose, I think, was the first single, but that was good. Zero Chance was an excellent song. Love that one. Blow Up the Outside World was I think it was the most successful single off of this album. Burden in My Hand was good as well. That might have been actually, Burden in My Hand was the single, and that was the most successful one. But it was a strong album from Soundgarden. But obviously when they bring out a killer album like Super Unknown, it's a bit hard to live up to, but a little bit more experimental, and I think it waned off a bit near the end of the album. I think the first half was a lot stronger on this one, and I'll give Soundgarden Down from the Upside 8 out of 10. Right, my number 2, Rage Against the Machine, Evil Empire. So when this came out, I was a little bit disappointed back then. This is another one that's got a follow-on from such a huge album, which was their debut, and it was hard to live up to. It was a few years after as well, and I think it fell a little bit flat. And you know what, compared to the debut, I really don't think it's anywhere near as strong as that even now. There are some really good moments on this though. Balls on Parade is one of my favourite Rage Against the Machine songs. Vietnam, which I didn't actually like at the time that much, I actually really like now. I think that's one of the best tracks on the album. Down Rodeo was good, and the actual last track, Year of the Boomerang, I love that. It's got a real groove to it, you know. It's a brilliant song. But yet again, I don't think this album was consistent enough. When you talk about the debut album and even albums to come from Rage, they were a lot better, more consistent. I think this was probably, for me, it's the weakest one in their discography, but still, you know, Raging Against the Machine is such a good band that it's still got number 2 for that year. And I'll score Rage Against the Machine, Evil Empire 8 out of 10. So that brings my number 1. My number 1 is Alice in Chains Unplugged. So, you know what, I couldn't stop playing this video. I got the video as well back in the day, and you really got to appreciate this band. Obviously this was Lane Staley was really hurting at the time. He was going through some real problems with his drug habit, so it was a difficult time. But you know, to step out and put a vocal performance in like Lane did, and you know what, I think this is all about Lane, this album, you know. And obviously through the years it's been people look back at this and realised what a brilliant performance this was. It sort of got mixed reviews when it first came out, but over the years people have looked back at it and thought, you know, what a brilliant performance from Lane Staley on here. Obviously all the band as well, but yeah, it's brilliant. And this was at a time when all the bands were doing a lot of unplugged stuff on MTV. I've heard there was a few, you know, that record a few songs. They kept having to repeat a few songs because Lane was having problems. I don't know the truth behind that, but the actual result at the end of it, what came out of it, was brilliant. You can't compare to Lane's vocals, you know. You can understand why people latch onto the band because of Lane. Obviously it ain't all about him. We all know Jerry Cantrell's the mainstay of the band, and he even writes brilliant material now and records brilliant material now. But obviously over the years where Lane passed away, people look back at this and looked at it as a great performance from Lane. So some of my, you know, it's obviously got all the songs that people know on this, all the favourites, but you know, they did attempt some, like some other songs, you know, some songs that you wouldn't think would transfer to acoustic on here, but they did. It was still a great performance. You know, Wood, for instance, was a good performance on here. But for me, the songs that were slower on the albums sounded the best on this. You know, they transferred the best to acoustic. Down in a Hole was a real good one on here. Brother, love that song. No Excuses as well. And of course the song he stepped out to, what, you know, you get hairs on the back of your neck when you see this video, especially, or even hear it on CD, when you hear the guitars and the drums and that come in, and then Lane hits that microphone. We chase misprinted lies. You're just like blown away. Do you know what I mean? What a voice, what a brilliant voice Layne had. So I think this was really important, this album, and it sort of brings you back and makes you realise, like I said before, the problems he was going through, how difficult this must have been. And it's, you know, so glad they recorded this. You know, it was without a doubt one of the best live performances ever. So I'd score Alice in Chains Unplugged, obviously 10 out of 10. What a performance. So we're going to go on to honourable mentions. There are quite a few, but I won't dwell on them too much, just mention the album titles. These of course would probably be in a lot of people's top 3 or 4 or 5. But you've got to look at Korn, Life is Peachy, their sophomore effort. They brought that out. You know what, for me it didn't have the same impact as the first album. Maybe that first album came out, it was some of the shock value on it was, you know, it made you lots of people stand up and listen, but they had good albums to come. So, you know, for me it just wasn't, it didn't hit the high notes of the first album. You had, this band is going to be on a lot of people's list, and you can understand why. For me, their latter albums were better, and that's Tool. And they brought out Enema this year. You know, that is classed as a lot of people's favourite Tool album. But it's good, but I preferred some of their other stuff, some of the latter stuff. So still a good one though, definitely worth mentioning. You had Zakk Wylde, obviously played with Ozzy. He brought out his Book of Shadows album. It was like an acoustic, more mellow sort of stuff. Pretty good. And of course it had that southern feel that you get from the Zakk Wylde stuff. You know, so if you haven't heard any of the Zakk Wylde solo stuff, it's very similar to that, especially the voice as well, to the Down stuff with Phil Anselmo. You know, it doesn't quite hit the mark really for me, but still worth mentioning. Pearl Jam's No Code came out. I quite like that. I was really into that when it first came out, but I don't know, it didn't last for me. I don't listen to that album now, and I think this list should be about albums that you could put on now, and it's just as, you just get into it just as much as you did back then. And also Journey, one of my favourite bands. You know, I love Journey, and they brought out Trial by Fire, and this was one of the first. They hadn't bought an album for years with Steve Perry on vocals, probably since Raised on Radio, sorry. But this was a really good album actually. It's probably a bit of an underrated one for me. And you know what, I'm a bit of a latecomer when it comes to this album, because after Raised on Radio came out, I didn't get into them again until they came back with that new singer. Arnell, was it? In the later years, so only a few years ago. So I sort of left Journey for quite a while, but I've recently started listening to this, and you know what, I really like it, and I haven't listened to it enough to put it in my top 5 or top 6 yet, but it could well end up in there in the future. So yeah, brilliant. So 1996, not a bad year. I might do a reaction tomorrow. I might do 1997, not really sure yet. But glad you enjoyed the video. Hope to see you next time. Cheers.